Hello Internet, Seth Skorikowski, and today we'll be exploring the apocalypse with the tabletop role-playing game Delta Green. Created by Adam Scott Glancy, John Tynes, and Dennis Detweiler, Delta Green originally appeared in The Unspeakable Oath issue 7 in 1992, a Call of Cthulhu fanzine by Pagan Publishing. It was later expanded into a Call of Cthulhu setting guide by Pagan Publishing in 1997. After several years, it spun off from Call of Cthulhu into two different versions. Fall of Delta Green, a sort of prequel setting through Pelgrane Press that follows the program during the 1960s and uses the Gumshoe game mechanics, and its own role-playing game in 2016 through Arc Dream Publishing, and is now supported by several scenarios, operation collections, and campaigns, which is the version that we'll be talking about today. Holy crap, finally! I mean, we covered the Delta Green Quick Start adventure like 7 years ago? And this whole time people have been asking me, hey, when are you guys going to cover Delta Green again? And I'm all like, yeah, I'm not at liberty to discuss a super secret shadow government program that don't officially exist. Duh. Hey, I'm Jack the NPC, but you can call me Agent Jack. I'm here to investigate, eliminate, and cover up the unnatural threat, all while desperately clinging to what little sanity that I got left. First thing, what is Delta Green? It's a role-playing game about a super-secret government program by the same name, taking place in the world of H.P. Lovecraft. The program's origin comes from the story The Shadow over Innsmouth, when federal agents stormed the cursed coastal village in 1928, rounding up the locals and firing torpedoes in the Deep One city off the Massachusetts coast. Now aware of the mythos threat, the program continued on, finding action in the Second World War against the Nazi research into the unnatural, then later at Roswell, and throughout the Cold War. It's existed in several forms for almost 100 years now. Delta Green isn't officially recognized as a government program. Player characters, or agents as they're called in the game, come from various alphabet soup departments, the FBI, CIA, DEA, etc. Others are military, active, or former, who might have encountered the unnatural while on deployment. Others might be civilian, computer experts, attorneys, scientists, doctors, or other people who've not only encountered the unnatural but have the skills to combat it. Agents might not even know each other's real names, but every once in a while they get a call from a block number telling them where to meet up, and their handler offers them what little information they have and gives them their orders. Missions involve investigation, discovering a threat's nature and searching clues and interviewing witnesses. Many times there is a lot of action. They may face moral dilemmas, such as sacrificing an innocent life to save another or save humanity itself, but all missions contain a cover-up. Sometimes that cover-up involves that you gotta do some pretty distasteful things. I mean, we got rules in this game about how to effectively burn and dissolve bodies, but, it's all for the greater good. At least, that's what I tell myself. The most obvious description to Delta Green is that it's like X-Files meets Lovecraft, and while fans are always very quick to point out that Delta Green released before the X-Files released, it doesn't make the comparison any less true. It's the easiest way to describe what Delta Green is in under 10 seconds. Delta Green is a game about conspiracies and consequences. It's about fear of the monsters, fear of getting caught, fear of your own life and sanity, paranoia that your own government might consider you a loose end and put a bullet in the back of your head. Delta Green is ultimately a game about fear itself. Obviously, the game has a lot of similarities to Call of Cthulhu. I mean, it originally spun off from Call of Cthulhu, but it's also a very different game. Now, one infuriating claim that I've repeatedly encountered, whether on gaming forums or from other reviewers, is that the difference between them is that Call of Cthulhu is set in the 1920s and Delta Green is set in the modern day. And that is fundamentally wrong. First, while Call of Cthulhu is most famous for its 1920s setting, modern-day rules exist in the Call of Cthulhu core book. I've reviewed a dozen modern-day Call of Cthulhu adventures on this very channel, and that's before we get to the expanded settings like Dark Ages, Roman era, sci-fi, and Victorian era. Delta Green being set in the modern day is not the difference between these two games. It's the themes and how the different mechanics emphasize those different themes. Delta Green is darker. It's about the characters' relationships, breaking down down as they struggle against the horrors of what all they've seen and what all is they've done. It's ultimately about that tightening paranoia, because ultimately the player characters are disposable assets from a faceless and secret organization. Delta Green is a lot less forgiving than Call of Cthulhu. We have no luck pool, no second chance pushed rolls. The deck is stacked against the player characters from both the narrative side and from the mechanics side of the game. Okay, so what do I need to play Delta Green? Well, there are two core rule books for it. The Agent's Handbook, which is 189 pages, and the Handler's Guide, which is 362 pages. The Agent Handbook contains all the rules that you need to play Delta Green. It's all just right there. The Handler's Guide has tips for game masters for running Delta Green adventures, stats for monsters, and tomes of forbidden knowledge, magic spells and ceremonies, a starting adventure called Operation Fulminate, and lots of lore. There is a lot of great stuff, but the Agent's Handbook is the most important book to get if you're only going to get one of them. Now, I need to touch on the lore section in the Handler's Guide. Delta Green has a lot of lore over its almost 100 years that it's been in operation. Various operations, defeats, discoveries, and shakeups in the program itself. The History of Delta Green section is about 120 pages long, and the lore is referenced in many of the Delta Green adventures. While a lot of gamers really love learning the game world lore and all its minutiae, game lore usually just bores me to tears. I don't like feeling like I have to read a textbook of just made-up history just in order to play a role-playing game. But, as I play it, I'll start picking up, little bits and pieces here and there, and then I'll dive into certain sections that might relate to some adventure that I'm running, and then eventually, after I've been playing a game for a while and I'm good and hooked into the game, that's when I start learning all the game lore that's involved around the game. All this to say is that game masters out there who are wanting to run Delta Green don't feel that you gotta read and memorize that entire history of the Delta Green program just in order to play this game. I mean, yeah, it is really nice that it's there and really useful if you want to use any of the resources that it provides. But if you're like us and you want to focus all your brain power on your players and your game, don't feel that you have to read all that stuff just in order to run Delta Green. After the books, all you need is a standard set of polyhedral dice, and that is it. Okay, so let's talk about the player characters, or agents as they're called. Pulling up a character sheet, which is done in the style of a US government form, let's look at our stats. We have 6 stats: strength, constitution, dex, intelligence, power, meaning willpower, and charisma. Pretty standard for a lot of tabletop role-playing games. Stats are in the standard 3 to 18 spread that you find in a lot of other games. You simply roll 46 and total up the highest 3, dropping the lowest 1. For example, let's just say that my stats are this, and then we list out what they are multiplied by 5. This gives us what our saves are if we need to make a save versus strength or something like that, just using percentile dice. Our stats determine our derived attributes. So hit points is our strength plus our constitution divided by 2 and rounding up. So 10 and 11 comes to 21, which dividing that by 2 is 10 and a half, which rounds up to 11 hit points. Willpower points, which we'll get into how those work in a bit, equal our POW, so in this case it's going to be 12 willpower points. Sanity, which we'll also get to in a bit, is our POW times 5, so in this case it's 60. Our breaking point is when our character suffers a mental break, and that's our SAN minus our POW, so in this case 48. Now that's the rough and dirty of how we get our stats. Delta Green is a skill-based system, so we don't have character levels at all, so outside of rare and difficult circumstances where we manage to raise our strength and or our constitution, we're not going to be getting any more hit points than we have right here. In fact, it is entirely possible to sustain a permanent injury that lowers one of your main stats, such as your strength or your constitution or something like that, right? And if that happens, any of your derived attributes that are based on that statistic, such as your hit points or your willpower, that sort of thing, that permanently goes down as a result of that. So try not to get hurt. Next, we'll choose our agent's profession. Now, as I said, many come from government agencies, the military, or various private sector jobs. Each profession gives us a particular set and value of skills as well as a number of character bonds. So, looking at our character sheet, the skills for Delta Green are listed here, and our bonds will be listed here. Now, let's say we wanted to play an intelligence analyst. You can see that the skills they receive is anthropology 40%, bureaucracy 50%, computer science 40%, etc. etc. Now, with a list of available skills, many start off with some points already in them as their base rating, such as bureaucracy just starts off at 10%. So the skills that we get are in addition to the base. So the 50% that I get for bureaucracy is added to the 10% that I already started with, giving me a 60% in that skill. We also get 3 bonds as an intelligence analyst, so we'll note those on our sheet as well as who those people are with their score value starting off equal to our charisma stat. Bonds are a big deal in Delta Green, and players are going to have to put some thought into this. Now, of course, they can be a person, such as your wife Susan, or they can be a group of people, such as your church group or your Thursday night bowling team. These are the characters that keep our character grounded, the ones that they're fighting to save, or the ones that they're fighting to stay alive just to get home to see them again, right? So players, you got to put a little bit of thought into who your bonds are, flesh them out a little bit, give them some names and some details about them, because these are about to be the key NPCs in your character's life that your game master is going to be playing. After that, we get to allot some more skill points to wherever it is we want to put them, rounding out our character a little bit. Though no starting skill can start off above 80%, which I really like that they have that cap at 80% because it means that a player character, they can't just pump all their skill points into just one single skill and, now that character is really capable at one thing, but they're completely unskilled at everything else. There's a little bit more to character creation, but just for the sake of this review, I just wanted to show and touch on these areas and kind of show what they look like and kind of show how they're determined to offer a little bit more context when we start covering the game's mechanics. Delta Green is a percentile-based system, much like Call of Cthulhu or other BRP games. When performing a task check, the player simply rolls percentile dice. If they roll their skill level or under, they succeed. Congratulations. If they roll above their skill level, then they fail. Better luck next time. If the dice roll is a double, 11, 22, 44, etc., then something special happens. If the roll was successful and is a double, then you achieve what's called a critical success, which is just twice as good as a regular success, meaning that if it's an attack, you double the damage, or if you did some other task, you might complete it twice as fast or get some other effect. However, if a skill check fails and that roll was a double, 55, 66, 77, then you suffer a critical failure, and something even worse happens than a regular failure. Now, this could be a physical strain, reducing your hit points, or temporarily reducing an attribute, maybe emotional burnout, costing you some of your willpower points, a lingering distraction that penalizes your next roll, or some other bad effect occurs. In the event of an opposed skill check, like you're trying to sneak past a guard or trying to pass off some lies being true, both parties are going to roll whatever their appropriate skill is for that check. Now, if one party is successful, then that party wins. If both parties are successful, then a critical success is going to beat a regular success. But in the cases where both opponents succeed at the same level, so whichever one rolled higher is going to be the winner. And in cases where both parties fail the skill check, whoever rolls the lowest could be the winner, but it really depends on the game master if there is a winner to that situation. Which that rule in particular is something that game masters might consider ripping off and porting over and house ruling into any other games they're playing where you got opposed skill checks and neither party is succeeding at a skill check. Because you don't want always your games to be this ridiculous comedy of errors where nobody is succeeding at nothing, right? Like somebody's trying to sneak into a place and they're doing a bad job and they're tripping over paint cans and making all this racket, but somehow the completely oblivious security guard fails to notice all that stuff. Or the player characters, they're interrogating a cultist and that cultist gives the worst lie in the freaking world going, I don't know where the ceremony is. But somehow the player characters, they're completely dense and they don't notice that this dude is clearly lying to them, which yeah, that can be funny at times when everybody fails their roles, but just as much, if not more so, it is frustrating for everybody around the table if nobody is succeeding at nothing, and it's just failures all the way down. A lot of games like to promote the idea that players shouldn't have to roll for basic tasks, like driving to the store to buy some socks. There shouldn't even be a roll to that drive check involved, unless there's some sort of special circumstance around it, such as you're rushing to get there, there's extreme weather, or your car is on fire and you ain't got time to put it out because you really need some socks right now. So that's great. I love that. That is the type of thing that I do in all other games where you save the rolls for when it is they actually matter. Delta Green takes this concept even a little bit further. Since your skill rating represents how competent your character is in a particular field, so 20 to 29% means that you're just a dedicated hobbyist. At 40 to 59%, you've got the equivalent of a college major or very years of experience doing this task. At 50%, you're considered to be fluent in a foreign language. Then at 60 to 79%, you're at doctorate level mastery of that subject. So characters who are very capable in a particular skill, maybe 50% or higher, they don't even need to make a roll for certain tasks that involve their expertise, even if everyone else in the group would need to make a roll for that particular task. It might take them a little bit of time, but it's just something that an expert in that field would just know how to do. It's not a mundane task is like driving a car for everybody, but it's a mundane task for that particular character because they're extremely experienced in whatever that is. Holy crap, I freaking love this rule. I mean, it is really frustrating when you make your character and they're supposed to be a specialized expert in some sort of field, but then once the dice get involved, they can't seem to succeed at anything involving the field that they're supposed to be a freaking expert in. It's kind of like, yeah, I get it why your character needs to make a skill check in order to isolate and identify DNA that might be found in that evidence right there, but I've been doing this job for 15 freaking years. I practically wrote the book on how to do that. So give me a laboratory and give me a little bit of time and there ain't no reason in the freaking world why I should even fail at that role. Again, Game Masters, this is a really cool rule that you might consider ripping off and house ruling into the other games that you're playing out there. The rules give 3 situations when a task roll should be called for. When the task is difficult, sometimes it's even difficult for an expert to do, when the situation is unpredictable or isn't ideal, or when there are severe consequences for failure. Sometimes failing the roll might mean that a task succeeds, but now the agent has to deal with the consequences. Again, I consider this just solid Game Master advice for just about any role-playing game out there. I'm happy to see it written out nice and clear in the Delta Green rules because I think this is just some really good general Game Master advice. We also have modifiers to skill checks if we have special circumstances going on or outside factors that might be making it easier or harder, such as insufficient tools, or we're really taking our time, or maybe we've got a lot of distractions going on and now we have to make a roll because this is not an ideal situation. Now, personally, I just prefer the method of applying 1 or 2 bonus or penalty dice, but that's just me. Doing the math for 20% or 40% from a skill level isn't too difficult. They're nice big round numbers, so it's no big deal. Another feature that I really dig is special training. Sometimes there is a skill that is extremely useful for a player character to have, but isn't something that by itself is incredibly complicated once you know the basics of how to do it. Picking a lock, for example. It isn't that difficult to pick a lock, just providing you know how to pick a lock, but giving your character a really high lock-picking skill to the point they're now competent, in lock-picking just soaks up a significant portion of the character's available skill points that could have gone towards actual complicated skills. Same thing for skills that are complicated but also require a secondary skill in order to do them, such as scuba diving, for example. That is definitely a skill, but you also have to know how to swim in order to scuba dive. So all scuba divers know how to swim, but not all people who know how to swim are able to scuba dive. So that's where special training comes in. These are for specializations that don't warrant being independent skill slots, but you definitely need to be trained in order to do them. Some careers teach special training, while other characters might just pick them up on their own, and the player character just simply notes on their sheet what special training that they have, such as parachuting. It's not an independent skill, but if your character wants to jump out of an airplane, providing they've been trained on how to do this right, we simply make an athletics roll or a dexterity roll. So if you've been scuba trained, then you just simply make a swim check. I really appreciate this as a way that allows characters to really be specialized in certain fields without just eating up all of their available skill points, and now they're not capable of doing anything else because they wanted to have a character that can, scuba dive or parachute or something like that. Improving a skill is done through using those skills, or more accurately, they're improved through failure to use those skills. Whenever a player character attempts a skill roll and fails that skill roll, they mark this little checkbox beside that particular skill. Then at the end of the session or the end of the adventure, they roll a d4 minus 1 for each skill that has a check beside it, and they add up the result to whatever their skill is. Which is a small comfort whenever you fail that skill roll, that you know that skill is probably going to be better the next time you try to make that skill check. That's of course providing that you're able to survive whatever blowback it was that failed skill check might have just caused. Many operations are going to come down to kill or be killed, so let's talk about combat. Combat is pretty straightforward in Delta Green. Rounds last just a few seconds. Initiative order just goes by whoever has the highest dex, and then just going down from there. We use our skill checks to hit an opponent. Strong characters get a bonus to any melee damage. We get various combat modifiers as both bonuses and penalties for stuff like range and moving targets. And armor reduces weapon damage. All pretty standard stuff for a lot of games, especially, BRP systems or BRP derivatives. So let's focus on what makes Delta Green combat different than all those other games. First, you only get one action per round. Now, this includes moving more than 3 meters or dodging. So if you want to move more than 3 meters, you don't get an attack roll. Now, personally, I think there should be some sort of modifier for, firing while running or making a running kick and to tackle some opponent, with some sort of penalty involved. Or if a character is faced with a melee attack and they choose to dodge that melee attack, that's going to turn this into an opposed roll. But that is their action for the entire round, is just dodging enemy attacks. So we can keep this combat moving pretty quickly because we don't have a lot of opposed rolls for every single melee attack. It's just, if they want to turn this into an opposed roll, that's it for this round. That's all they're going to be doing. Now, if you recall when I calculated some sample stats, that character only has 11 hit points. So with that in mind, when it comes to weapon damage, it might take 2 to 4 hits to reduce a character to 0 hit points with a melee weapon. Then with small arms, 2 pistol shots or even a single shot from a rifle or shotgun, that could reduce the character to 0 just straight out the gate. And that's before we even get to stuff like rolling a critical hit, doubling the damage that was rolled. All this to say is that a single hit from brass knuckles or even a switchblade, that's going to seriously screw up your day, but you are probably going to be able to take a few hits before you're gone, right? You're going to be able to make some moves. But if the bad guy pulls a freaking gun on you, it could be lights out before you even get a chance to do nothing that turn. So all of a sudden the idea of maybe foregoing your attack action to take a dodge action, to jump behind cover, or at least drop to the ground to become a prone target and harder to hit, that don't seem like a bad idea once that cultist draws iron on you. When a character is reduced to 2 hit points, they're knocked unconscious. On top of that, falling to 2 or fewer hit points means that you could be permanently injured. The player character needs to roll percentile dice against their con stat times 5, and if they fail that roll, they suffered some sort of permanent injury. So you take the lowest of those 2 10-sided dice that you just rolled right there and subtract the value from whatever stat the handler chooses. So if you fail that roll, let's say with a roll of a 91, that means you're going to lose 1 point from one of your attributes. That sucks, but it's not the end of the world. However, if you fail that roll, let's say with a roll of a 79, that means that one of your attributes is about to go down by 7 freaking points because 7 was the lower between 7 and 9, and that can be freaking devastating. Especially so if that stat that just went down has derived attributes off of it, like your maximum hit points. That can really suck. Instead of lowering a character's stats, there is also an optional rule where handlers might elect a different permanent injury instead, like partial blindness or partial deafness or losing a limb. Once a character hits 0 hit points, they are dead. Unless the handler says that resuscitation is possible, a character can be resuscitated with a first aid roll in as many minutes as their con score is, and that then restores 1d4 hit points, meaning that if they get to be 2 or above, they can regain consciousness. Now, personally, I would add some modifiers to this if the character who's making the first aid roll doesn't have a trauma kit or some really specialized equipment like an adrenaline shot or a defibrillator or something. Also, their con score in minutes is a really long time to be clinically dead, so maybe they divide their con score by 3, and then for the first third, there's just no minus, it's just a roll like normal, but then for the second third, they have a minus 20, and then for that final third of whatever their con score is in minutes, you do a minus 40 to give it a little bit of urgency that the other player characters should start doing first aid right away. Okay, so that's it for the small weapons. Let's talk about the big guns, because this is one of my favorite features that Delta Green adds. Heavier weapons like automatic fire and explosives, they don't use damage die like a D10 or a D12. Instead, they have what's called a lethality score, such as an automatic submachine gun is 10%, while a hand grenade is is 15% lethality. Now what that means is that when you score a hit with one of these weapons, you roll percentile dice, and if you roll a lethality rating or less, the target dies. We don't even mess with the hit points, they're just dead right there, it's lights out. Now if that roll fails, we simply add those 2d10 together and apply that as the attack's damage. Which means you ain't out of the woods just yet, because if I shot you with this SMG and it's got a 10% lethality rating, let's say I rolled a 70, well, congratulations, that means that I didn't just automatically grease your ass with the lethality rating, but now I gotta add those 2 percentile dice together, which is 7 plus 0, which we use that as 10, meaning that I just did 17 points of damage to you with that shot, so unless you got some really kick-ass body armor, you're still dead. I love this mechanic. A lot of games struggle with automatic fire rules and, requiring that we roll damage for individual bullets, or we're making multiple attack rolls for a certain number of bursts to represent automatic fire. Some games make it where automatic fire just really isn't that impressive at all. It's just kind of neutering automatic fire just to keep the game simple, or, not unfairly balanced or something like that. Against like maybe a sword or a knife, all of a sudden automatic fire, it's just too powerful or something. But Delta Green hits that perfect spot of making these weapons both terrifying and mechanically simple. And depending on how many bullets you want to spend on that automatic burst, you can easily hit multiple targets with a short burst up to a long spray. And that just increases the kill radius of who all is affected by whatever this attack is. The lethality rules are just so elegantly simple, I freaking love them. Next, let's talk about willpower points, or WPs the cool kids call them. As I covered earlier, they're determined by a character's POW stat, and they're like magic points you would have in Call of Cthulhu, but there is a lot more to them. Willpower points represent a character's mental energy, kind of like your mental hit points. They're used to show the effects of exhaustion from staying up too late or just going through some extended task, to resisting torture or interrogation. They represent that mental energy that a player character uses to cast spells. Now, while some spells are unnatural entities, they might be able to attack your character's willpower, bending you to their will. Now, at 2 willpower points or less, you begin suffering an emotional breakdown and suffering a minus 20% on all actions. Then, once you run out of willpower points, you just lose control, maybe breaking down in tears or lashing out and smashing things because you can't focus and your patience is just completely gone. You can't succeed any skill tests or sanity tests once you're completely out of willpower points. Then eventually you're going to pass out and get some sleep, and the only way to gain willpower points is you gain 1d6 from a good night's sleep, and that's really the only way, is just to rest. However, sometimes your character can't rest. They need to stay up late solving the case, or running from here to there, or maybe grinding all night researching some particular task, or maybe they're on a stakeout or something like that. That's where exhaustion comes in. If a character's been awake for too long or hasn't stopped to take a breather after a fight or losing some sanity, they can start suffering exhaustion. An exhausted agent loses 1d6 willpower points and may suffer minuses to their skill and stat tests as well. Then every night that they continue without sleep loses them another 1d6 willpower until they finally get some sleep, either by choice or by passing out once they reach 0 WP. Now, as often the case during operations, you ain't got time to sleep, too much stuff going on. However, that exhaustion penalty of a minus 10 or a minus 20 to all your skill checks, that can be a real bummer. But you can save off those penalties by taking stimulants, which means now you're out chain smoking and you're down in cups of coffee and you're staying up just a few more hours more. Now, of course, you can stay up even later and avoid those penalties even longer if you start taking some harder stuff like some amphetamines, right? However, even if you stave off those penalties for being exhausted, you are still losing willpower points every time you keep staying up, which means eventually you're going to freak out and then pass out, possibly even earn a nice drug addiction to boot. And finally, what Lovecraft game would be complete without sanity, or insanity, as eventually the case often is? We already covered how character sanity points are their POW stat times 5. Sanity points represent your agent's resilience against the horrors of the world, both natural and unnatural things. The higher their sanity, the more self-awareness and more life-affirming view of reality that the character has. As their sanity points start whittling down, the deadly and unfathomable truths of the universe begin overwhelming them. They begin taking taking on disorders every time they hit their breaking point, and eventually, if their sanity points reach 0, the agent's mind is forever lost to madness. Now, that's pretty much how Call of Cthulhu does it. Tried and true mechanics right there, and anyone familiar with Call of Cthulhu should recognize all this so far, with only a few teeny tiny variations, so there's no need to go into all those details, and let's just focus instead on where Delta Green goes different, because their take on sanity mechanics is really, really fun. First, while sanity points all come from the same general pool, the things that cause sanity loss are broken into 3 different categories. The first category is violence. True violence is horrifying. The deafening gunfire and howls of pain, the meaty thwack of bludgeoning a man's skull in, the cold blades sliding beneath your ribs, the stink of burning flesh, it can overwhelm the mind. So anytime that an agent experiences lethal violence, either inflicting it or suffering it, they roll a sanity check to determine how badly this rattles the agent. The second category is helplessness, and this is from feeling unable to act or the despair of being beyond all help. Losing your job, going to prison, a loved one becoming injured or dying, waking up blind. When an agent finds themselves helpless to an indifferent world, they also roll a sanity check. Now, one interesting thing here is with both violence and helplessness, an agent can become hardened against these types of trauma. If a character can lose sanity to violence or helplessness 3 times in a row without going temporarily insane, which is from losing 5 or more at one time, or from hitting their breaking point, they become permanently adapted against this type of sanity loss. That means that you're always going to succeed a sanity roll against that type of trauma going forward. Now, this isn't without its costs, of course. Becoming adapted to violence harms your character's empathy, and they permanently lose 1d6 from the charisma stat as well as the same stat from each of their bonds. Adapting to helplessness means that your agent's personal drive has just been worn down, and they permanently reduce their POW stat by 1d6. Meaning that in order to protect your mind from all these horrors that your character is facing, you had to sacrifice just a little piece of yourself. So yeah, your personal motivation and maybe your ability to connect with people, that did suffer some. But the trade-off is that you are going to remain cool as ice and not lose your head the next time the shit hits the fan. The third category of what can hurt your sanity is the unnatural, the things that shouldn't be. Hypergeometry, magic, and the eldritch creatures from beyond space-time with way too many tentacles. Witnessing or interacting with the supernatural defies our comprehensions of reality. And unlike with violence or helplessness, an agent can never ever become adapted to unnatural sanity loss. I really dig this mechanic. It addresses one of the issues that I have with sanity systems like Call of Cthulhu because it's categorizing sanity loss into different things that can cause your sanity loss, but it also allows a good mechanic to allow our character to become desensitized to that sort of thing going forward, but also cost them a little bit of their humanity in return. So by this part alone, Delta Green's sanity system is phenomenal, but Delta Green decided to up this, even making it even better. Each character begins with several NPC bonds. The number of those depends on their career, such as the intelligence agent comes with 3 bonds. Each bond begins with a score equal to whatever our charisma stat is. Now these are the people or the groups of people who are most important in the agent's life. Who it is that they want to protect and come home to. And, devoting time to your bonds between missions is a great way of restoring just a little bit of sanity. Unfortunately for all those key NPCs in your player character's life, the program is a jealous mistress and a total homewrecker. Bonds can be used towards sanity in 2 big ways. First is projecting sanity loss. So when an agent loses sanity, they can choose to spend 1d4 willpower points, which then reduces the sanity loss by that same amount. This represents the NPC bond being blamed, or the character taking it out on them as a way of coping with whatever they just witnessed. However, as a result, the bond's score decreases by that same amount, meaning that this projected resentment manifests in a way that hurts that relationship overall. Unfairly taking it out on this NPC or simply not feeling the same connection with them anymore once they return home. The second major way to use bonds for sanity is when they're facing a panic or temporary insanity or struggling with some sort of disorder. The agent can find their strength by focusing on this bond to get them through it, kind of using them like their emotional rock. Again, we spend 1d4 willpower points to keep it together by focusing on this bond, trying to keep ourselves in order, but by the same time, we're going to reduce the bond score by that same d4 amount, because the agent has this kind of emotional dependency that ultimately ultimately strains the relationship. So if a bond score is reduced to 0, the relationship is lost, and the agent must make a sanity check versus helplessness or lose 1d4 sanity because the agent has managed to push their bond away, becoming even more isolated and more emotionally vulnerable. I freaking love this. I love how a player makes these important NPC relationships during their character creation, and then we get to watch those relationships, fall apart as the agent returns home after each operation, just a little bit more distant from them, or taking their frustrations out on their loved ones. It's such a great representation of how trauma can affect our relationships with the people that we love. It's a fantastic sanity mechanic and a role-playing tool. I just simply love it. Now, despite my glowing review, I do have a few criticisms and things that game masters should consider before they decide to run Delta Green. First, well, the layout and design is just simply gorgeous. I mean, these books are works of art. How well they immerse you in the mood of Delta Green just through the simple act of reading the book. I find the rule books just a little bit difficult to navigate in-game or mid-session. Sometimes the sections are just a little bit verbose, and trying to find some rule or something mid-session can be really tricky when you're trying to find that rule just kind of hidden in a column of text. Certain things that I feel should be listed together aren't listed together. For example, when it talks about bonds breaking when they're reduced to 0 on page 36, it fails to mention the potential sanity loss as a result. You don't find that out until page 67, where it's kind of buried in the middle of the helplessness examples. I feel that should have been mentioned in the section that was specifically about broken bonds, or in the combat section where it describes the various actions that your character could take in their turn. It spreads them out across 2 pages, which is especially difficult to quickly scan in the middle of a combat if you're playing around the table, or if you're using a PDF or something, you're now having to scroll through multiple pages. I just wish I had a short bullet point list right there at the beginning of that section. It showed you that these are the actions that you can take during a combat round, and then you can read a little bit further if you want to have larger descriptions of those. And while the rulebooks do contain indexes, I find these indexes impossible to navigate. It's like this wall of text that's organized really weird, and could have used some bold text to denote the categories or bullet points to indicate the sublistings, because all of this blends together into a wall of text. I've tried to use this index several times and have never ever found what it is I'm looking for there. I've often opened up the PDF and just done a simple word search, because trying to use these indexes in the physical books is just absolutely impossible for me to do. Next, and this isn't actually a criticism, it's just something that game masters should consider. Delta Green is very, very dark. This is clearly intended for only adult players. Many of the adventures contain some very mature themes. The game is very clearly and repeatedly says it's about the apocalypse. It's not the cool road warrior apocalypse or getting to wear football armor or something like that. It's extremely nihilistic and grim. So just make sure that your players are up for that. Oh yeah, playing Delta Green feels a lot more like playing Cult Divinity Lost than it does playing Call of Cthulhu. I mean, yeah, we still have fun and we joke around and we got a lot of laughs in while playing it, but after a really good session, you kind of feel like you need to take a shower. Next, Delta Green has a very narrow focus. You play Delta Green agents who get called in to do a job by their handler. Now, maybe they're official Delta Green, or maybe with the unofficial outlaw Delta Green, but it's very geared towards your characters being U.S. government or working with the U.S. government. And all of this takes place in the present day, or at least the last decades of the 20th century up until the present day. It is extremely good at that. It nails that perfectly. But if that's not what you're wanting, then Delta Green might not be the game for you. Overall, Delta Green is a hell of a lot of fun. I'm currently a player in an Impossible Landscapes campaign right now, and we are enjoying the hell out of it. I really love gritty games where the character death is very, very possible, and horror games. So yeah, Delta Green is right up my alley. It does a great job of tweaking those BRP rules, and I dig the changes that it made. It also codifies several things into the rules that are really great, just game master general advice overall, so playing Delta Green has improved how I run other games that aren't Delta Green. I dig the setup where the characters are called in for a job. It cuts out one of those common game master hurdles that they face when running a lot of other games, of trying to get the players to bite the adventure hook or come up with some sort of plausible reason why all the player characters are at this specific spot when the adventure hook drops. It cuts all that out with your agent's handler just simply calling them in, handing them a file folder and saying, here's your job, now you got to do it right now. And also, if you need to bring in a new player character because one was killed or incapacitated, or we simply have a new player joining the group, the handler activates and sends in this new agent. It's all built in right there. Like, hey, we're sending in this new guy, here you go. And now we have to just go ahead and accept them because it's kind of like getting a new coworker in. It also gives game masters a really great way to help nudge your players along if they're dragging their feet with analysis paralysis or veering off into some just ridiculous tangent that has nothing to do with the adventure anymore. They can simply have the handler call the player characters on the phone and ask them for a status report, and then just yell at them for dallying around because they need to get this mission finished right now. It's also a great way of dealing with murder hobo player characters. The agents that go out there and they burn everything down, or they cause all sorts of collateral damage, or they make some huge public spectacle because they don't even bother trying to be stealthy or anything like that. If Delta Green decides that one of their agents is a murder hobo and therefore a liability, they got their own way of dealing with that for good. You can find Delta Green on the Arc Dream website for physical print editions or on DriveThruRPG for PDF copies. Or if you want to try before you buy, you can download the Quick Start Rules Need to Know that includes a sample adventure, Last Things Last, for absolutely free. Links below. If you're looking for a contemporary horror game that pushes paranoia and fear, I strongly suggest checking Delta Green out. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see some more of our stuff, such as game reviews or how-tos, just hit that subscribe button. If you want to support Seth's channel, consider picking up some of his books or novels, available in print and audiobook, and who knows, maybe you'll even enjoy it. Till next time, agents, you have a great day. Delta Green first made its appearance in the Unspeakable Oath fanzine, and that came with a little adventure by John Tynes called Convergence. However, there was also a sequel adventure that was written for that by John Tynes that was called Transference, but it appears in the Interface Cyberpunk 2020 fanzine, meaning that Delta Green and Cyberpunk exist in the same shared universe. And since I have been canonized as an official Cyberpunk NPC that's a real estate agent, that means that some of those buildings I gotta go into to kick out squatters, those squatters have got way too many tentacles. It makes sense, right? So much of the Cyberpunk lore is based off the idea that the US government collapsed and then the corporations had to take over. So you're Delta Green, you're living in secret inside the US government, and all of a sudden the US government just goes collapsing around you, and you're like, oh my God, what is it we're doing now? How are we gonna make money for all the stuff that we're doing to save humanity? Looks like we gotta go into business for ourselves. So, what industry is it that would explain why the agents gotta go inside all these abandoned warehouses and scary buildings and different stuff like that? Real estate. That's how they do it. So now it is, I'm operating in the Cyberpunk 2020 universe, minding my own business, and all of a sudden Delta Green gives me a call and says, yeah, you still work for us, buddy. I can change game systems and I'm still looped into them. I can never escape.